listener production.
Hi, it's Helen Smith here with you. Welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, we often get told that money doesn't buy you happiness, but is that really true? As the cost of living goes up, so does our desire for more money. So how much money do you need to be happy? First though, let's check the afternoon headlines. It's Monday, the 6th of October. Former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says US President Donald Trump should win a Nobel Peace Prize if he can end the war on Gaza.
I commend President Trump for what he's done to try and bring that to an end. And if President Trump pulls this one off, I can think of no more worthy recipient.
That audio thanks to Sky News. Morrison went on to call Trump's peace plan a game changer after the US president last week announced a 20-point peace plan to end the war on Gaza that would see hostages and prisoners released on both sides. It comes as Australian activists who were on board the global Sumud flotilla headed for Gaza carrying aid claim of degrading and humiliating treatment after being intercepted and detained by Israeli forces. Police are still looking for a motive for a 6-year-old man who was arrested in Sydney's inner west last night after allegedly firing between 50 to 100 shots at members of the public over a 2-hour period. The alleged gunman had no mental health history and no connections to organised crime or terrorism, according to police. 16 people are being treated for injuries, with one man who was shot in the neck and chest in a critical condition. And it turns out a lot of us don't see retail theft as a bad thing. A Monash survey found that a quarter of Aussies think it's justifiable, especially if it means manipulating promos or pushing customer service to its limit. It also found that most customers felt safer performing retail crime in shopping centres. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Dr. Brad Elphinstone from Swinburne University on why our motivation for money is important when it comes to our level of happiness and how social media plays into our perception of what happiness looks like, with one study finding that the average Aussie would need to earn around $180K a year to achieve maximum wellbeing. But what does that really look like? Brad, does having more money really make you happier?
It can, to a point. So I think the key thing to keep in mind is that it's not so much what you want, but it's why you want it. So if you go back to Aristotle in ancient Greece, he said that you need a certain amount of money to be on the path towards happiness. And for him, that was about growing optimally as a person, becoming, wiser, highly skilled. So you need enough money to have a roof over your head, enough food to eat, access to healthcare, and then access to things like education and hobbies and enough time to spend with your loved ones so that you can actually focus on that personal growth. A lot of people are also familiar with things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which has self-actualization at the top. That's this pinnacle of becoming, this wise, insightful, creative, compassionate person. But at the bottom of the hierarchy is safety and security. So if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, it's hard for you to focus on personal growth. And so we see that at universities, there's increasing numbers of students who are food insecure, that they are skipping meals because they can't afford it. And that plus the fact they might be working, long hours with high rents and everything means that they're struggling to find adequate time for their studies.
And we often hear, money doesn't buy you happiness, or you just need enough money to be comfortable. But what does that actually look like now in Australia? How much does the average Australian kind of need to be quote unquote happy?
It's a little bit tricky to know for sure, because there was some research that was done in 2010 in the US, which suggested that a household income after tax of about $75,000 was where well-being sort of plateaued. So from being of lower socioeconomic status up to that point was an increase in well-being, and then it sort of leveled out. And there's more recent research which indicates that happiness could keep going up with increasing income. So it's not like that 75,000 is like the absolute limit. But if you convert that 75 grand, first of all, to deal with inflation, that gets you to about 120,000 US. And then converting that to Aussie dollars in current exchange rates is somewhere around $180,000. But it's going to depend a lot on your living circumstances. So housing costs different amounts in different parts of the country. If you're dual income with no kids, then you might need less than a couple that has 6 kids and, has just bought a much bigger house with a much bigger mortgage that comes with it. So different people in different situations are going to need varying amounts, but it really comes down to that idea of just having enough that you are financially secure, but then also have the freedom and flexibility to pursue things that are meaningful to you.
And thinking about, that number, for example, say 180,000 Australian dollars, that is way higher than our average income that we have here in Australia. How achievable is that for most people?
Well, for a lot of people, it's probably not achievable. The median disposable household income is somewhere around 80 to 85,000, and the average is about 100. So yeah, unless people can somehow find a way to double their incomes, it's probably not achievable. And that means that a lot of households are finding cost of living a real struggle. There are those sacrifices that are being made that it's going up to the shops and not being able to necessarily buy everything that you would want to, and just having to cut back in certain areas, which means that there's not that amount of income available to have that extra hobby or to go on that holiday. And it might mean missing out on some of those enriching experiences that could help support someone's well-being.
Going back to the idea of measuring money and levels of happiness, can you broaden that out a bit? How did we become so focused on this topic?
Well, I suppose, money is so central to our culture. Like we live in a consumer culture where there is constant marketing saying that if you own certain things, that it's the key to happiness. And the reality is that that's just not supported by the research. There was a study done, or there is an ongoing study at Harvard University that has tracked people throughout their entire lives. And the first cohort of men, and it goes back to, I think, around the 1930s. And some of these men went on to be incredibly influential in politics, in business, in the media. Their identities are all under wraps for, I think, another 100 years. But despite these people having succeeded in ways that people would say, like, oh, if I did that, I would finally be happy, the overarching finding was that none of those little successes or big successes were the defining thing. It was relationships. That was the biggest thing that predicted mental and physical health and well-being throughout the lifespan. So the thing that sort of frustrates me about this idea of a consumer culture and materialism, which in psychology is the idea of buying things and acquiring wealth for reasons associated with image and status, is that it's often motivated by some sort of insecurity. It's low self-esteem, it's making negative comparisons against others, it's FOMO, that sense that, you don't have what other people do. And so people are on this treadmill of wanting to buy more and more to fill that void. And ironically, people, even if you are sort of able to afford it comfortably, you can get stuck on what's called the hedonistic treadmill, that you get used to a certain level of luxury, and then to get the same sort of buzz, you need more. Like the human brain is very good at adapting to things. There are times where you might have moved into a new place near a busy road, and at first all you can hear is the traffic, and then eventually you just tune it out. You don't even know it's there anymore. So we can do the same thing with wealth. And for me, the frustration is that there's all this consumption that's going on that's not necessarily making people happier. It's not dealing with the underlying insecurities that people have. And all of this overconsumption is really bad for the environment. So there needs to be a better way, I think, for a lot of people to figure out how to use their money. And part of that could be to put some of it towards finding a counselor or a psychologist and talking through some of these underlying insecurities that are the real issue. But the other pathway is to focus on experiential buying. So focus on those things that you're really passionate about in life and things that you can share with other people. So it could be going out for meals. It could be going on a holiday. It could be, if you're really into music, buy a guitar, pay for music lessons, develop a new skill. That's the stuff that can be really enriching and support relationships and personal growth. And that is much more likely to support your well-being than just endlessly buying stuff.
What are some of the biggest drivers you think that we have, especially as in the modern day with technology, to people wanting to have more and more and more and consume in this culture that we are living in that is very online, that aren't actually helping us in the long run?
Social media certainly appears to be part of it. A lot of people are putting this idealized version of themselves out there. And particularly for a lot of young people, where it is a period of life of trying to figure out who you are and what's important, it can be one of insecurity and feeling that you don't necessarily stack up compared to others, especially when what you're seeing on social media is this perfect, ideal version that actually isn't necessarily how people live on a day-to-day basis. So that inauthenticity of social media certainly has a role to play, but materialism has existed for many decades prior to that. The whole sort of marketing advertising system is based on identifying these insecurities people have and targeting them and selling a product as the solution to feeling better.
And when we're looking at different countries around the world, what countries exhibited the most happiness?
In the World Happiness Survey and the results came out recently, earlier this year, Scandinavian countries were in the top 5. I think Finland was number 1. Australia was number 10. So we're not doing too bad. But these are countries where there's potentially a bigger focus on equality than there is in Australia. There's also quite high levels of things like social trust and trust in government. And there are also much higher taxes there than there are in Australia. But people seem to get quite a high level of social benefits and effective institutions in exchange for that. So when there's things like free education and it's high quality education, it clearly seems as though it's worth the money. So people aren't maybe opposed to paying that amount in tax. So yeah, it's certainly a concern as economic inequality is getting worse in Australia. The data shows that. And there is data from over many years comparing different US states or comparing different countries against each other. And as inequality gets worse, social outcomes decline as well. You get higher violence, higher crime, teenage pregnancies go up, drug abuse goes up, obesity goes up as people struggle to afford nutritious food. And for me, coming at it from a social psychological perspective, trust goes down. There have been studies that have shown that a lost wallet is less likely to be returned in an area where trust is lower. In some research that myself and colleagues did through the pandemic, people who trusted the government more were more likely to comply with things like social distancing and wearing a mask. So trust is so fundamental to the fabric of what makes a country like Australia what it is. And if inequality increases and people start to feel that this country is not working for me, so why will I bother trying to contribute positively to my community, to the country more broadly, it starts to really erode at the foundations of what we are.
And talking about inequality, how big is the wealth gap in Australia when we're talking about, the average earner, and then we have CEOs that are earning a lot more than your Joe Blow down the street?
Based on recent Australian Bureau of Statistics data, the top 20% of earners in Australia have about 60% of the wealth. So that's quite an imbalance. And the bottom 20% have about 1%. And this is similar in places like the US, but people really underestimate how unequal things are. So there was a study from Melbourne University where they asked people, how much more do you think CEOs earn than the average earner? And what do you wish that ratio was? People think CEOs earn 7 times more than the average salaried worker, and they wish it was 3 times more. The reality, depending on who you read, is that it's actually 55 to 103 times more. And similar findings were found in the US. People think it's 10 times, they wish it was 5 times, and it's 300 times or more. So there is this real gap between the very wealthy and everyone else, and people really underestimate that.
When it comes to these levels of happiness, though, once you're earning over this threshold of, earning that is peak well-being, what happens after that?
Well, that's where it's sort of, to circle back around to the start, where it really comes down to why people have pursued that wealth. So if someone was earning millions of dollars a year, but they were using it in ways that was helping them grow as a person, they were focusing on those hobbies, education, perhaps they're giving money to charity, which has also been shown to be beneficial to well-being. It's that sense of making a tangible impact and knowing that you're helping others and that you might be part of a community that is helping to facilitate that positive change. Like that's a really effective path to well-being also. So in that regard, someone might be really wealthy, making a lot of money, and also using that money in ways that support their well-being. Like I imagine someone like Bill Gates is probably quite happy about all the philanthropic work that he's been doing. But if the reason why someone is working super long hours and taking on a lot of stress and pressure, and the reason why they're buying the big house and the flash cars and all that sort of stuff is because it's the insecurity that's driving it, that they are living and spending in line with materialism, where it's about image and status, that's where they might find themselves just increasingly struggling to find lasting happiness. And as wealth increases, it can create additional challenges. Like there have been studies on lottery winners who at first thought this is life-changing, this is amazing, this is going to improve my life forever after this. And then it created conflict within their family as people come out of the woodwork and expect that, why can't you just give me 50 grand? And then it's who's going to inherit what and all this sort of stuff. And it creates all this conflict that tears families apart. Even recently in the news, that the Murdoch family and their ongoing court case around who's going to take over the company in the future. I can't imagine that Christmas is, as maybe warm and fuzzy as it is in other households around Australia. And it's just, that there's, with wealth comes power and jealousy and all that other sort of thing. And that can be really challenging as well to manage. So it's not like more money is a magic path to happiness. And if you have that money, it's about using it sensibly and about the things that really speak to you. It's about intrinsic motivation, the stuff that comes from within. If it's about extrinsic motivation, where it's about trying to live up to the expectations of others and, it's just purely about acquiring money for the sake of it, that's when it's unlikely to be satisfying.
Brad, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Not a problem. Thank you.
That was Dr. Brad Elphinstone from Swinburne University of Technology there. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe wherever you're listening to this app from, and you can follow us at Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.